being in the trenches and not have things go well make you battle tested.
The Phil Bach Podcast. Investing, economics, entrepreneurship.
Welcome to the Phil Bach Podcast. My guest today is Pat Kelly. Pat is an entrepreneur, a financial advisor, and all-around trailblazer. He is the co-founder of Signal Advisors out of Detroit, Michigan. And we're going to have a conversation about Signal, about entrepreneurship, using doubters as fuel for entrepreneurial fire, and more. Pat, thank you for joining me on the show.
Phil, awesome to be here. Excited.
All right, let's start here. And then work back into your background. But I want to start with Signal Advisors. You recently announced the company with a press release. Tell me what the company is, what the value proposition is, and what Signal Advisors is.
Yeah, so Signal Advisors is a tech-enabled insurance distributor. The industry term is an IMO, which just stands for Independent Marketing Organization. But the core idea is, these insurance distributors in the past have been super sales-focused, really trying to understand how they can just recruit as many financial advisors as possible. And that was done through this role called a marketer. A marketer is an inside salesperson at an IMO. And so what
IMO is?
Independent Marketing Organization. So this kind of insurance distributor. And so this marketer role was just someone who really recruited and tried to provide kind of support and strategy to advisors. And so what we've done at Signal Advisors is we looked at that role and realized that they're actually, in some cases, taking almost 50% of the revenue of an insurance distributor. And so we thought, well, what could we do with that 50% that would add more value to the financial advisors that insurance distributors are serving? So there's really three core ways we do that, and I can get into them, but one of them is that we have advisor to advisor coaching. So peer-to-peer coaching, advisors who are in the trenches, building practices every single day. They're actually working with smaller producers who want to scale their business up. And so we think top producers are the number one people to do that job.
So I wanted to start there because you were a financial advisor, and I think that leads really into what you're doing now, to understanding how the business is run and how to add value, like you said. So let's go back to your career progression, where you started and how you got into the more entrepreneurial side of the business.
Yeah, I started at Northwestern Mutual. It was an internship, I think my junior year of college, actually. And, essentially, actually, it's pretty interesting. I haven't thought about this in a while. I found this very interesting niche. My brother went to West Point. And I realized they had something called SGLI, which is Service Members Group Life Insurance, which is essentially just a policy that is issued by the government, but it's through Prudential. And I saw it's a group policy, and group policies basically mean, they're taking everybody in that group and giving everyone the same rate. So people who are younger pay more than what they normally would on their own, and people who are older pay less. And so cadets at West Point are very young. So what I found was I could get them more insurance, and I could also save them money if they got an individual policy. So I found this little niche. I'm always like in business in general, just like super curious about niches and like how we can start building really big businesses out of these niches. So anyways, that was kind of my first thing. And that really kind of got my interest in the insurance industry and kind of figuring out how to build different structures and different marketing messages and all of that. And so coming out of Northwestern Mutual, I left because I decided to start a firm actually with my parents. It was a really cool experience where Kelly Capital Partners was the name of the firm, left Northwestern Mutual, and my mom and I actually started a firm together here in southeastern Michigan. And it was an independent financial advisory firm. And, we specialized in retirement planning and, provided the three core lines of business, which would be just, life insurance and estate planning, annuity business, and then also manage money or assets under management. So that was kind of like leading up in my financial advisory career. That was about 6 or 7 years.
And then you launched something called Rep Pro, right? And that was your first entrepreneurial endeavor. What was that?
Yeah, Rep Pro was interesting. Basically what it was a universal application for insurance-based products. So it was online applications. I found that in working at Northwestern Mutual and at Kelly Capital Partners, the status quo was that people submitted 40 to 60 page paper applications in the mail. And I was scratching my head about that and wondering why people were doing that. And, I had my first experience. I remember selling my first policy and it was for like $100. It was like someone just felt bad for me and bought a policy. But my first sale ever, I was like going through the sales process and it was 40-page application and I didn't know what boxes to check and I just didn't know how to fill this out. And I thought, man, you shouldn't need a full blown education in order to fill out this application. It should be way easier. So that was like a very simple way of like kind of finding the problem. I experienced it myself, but then also like as I got more familiar with the industry, I started understanding like this is a really massive problem. It goes all the way from the agent, really from the client to the insurance agent to the insurance distributor that we've talked about already, and then all the way to the insurance carrier. They all have this problem with processing paperwork and issuing policies. And so I built a company around the idea of fixing that issue, how to streamline the account opening process and the purchasing process of these insurance products.
And what was the eventual outcome of how long did you run the company and where did it go?
Yeah, I ran the company for 6 years. We ended up selling the company to RetireUp, which was a financial planning software. And that actually took me from Detroit to Chicago. I moved to Chicago for 2 years, and I was at RetireUp for about 2 years. And we really kind of merged the companies into something called RetireUp Pro. The idea was, could we streamline the process even further by you start with financial planning, the client and the advisor put all the information into the financial plan. Let's take that information and move it into the application process so that when you're ready to buy, you can just click and go. So that was the core idea behind RetireUp Pro and the combination of both Rep Pro and RetireUp. I led business development over there for 2 years and then joined forces with my two co-founders, Jake Cohen and Kevin O'Hara, to start Signal Advisors.
And what was the origin story? What was the moment that you and your co-founders were sitting around and you came up with the idea? Was it like a spontaneous idea? Were you whiteboarding things? Was it a process? And what was that go point where the three of you said, all right, this is it. This is what we're doing, and decided to move forward?
I mean, honestly, it happened over like 6 years.
6 years?
Yeah. So one of the things that happened was when I was raising money for Rep Pro, I was going around meeting with different venture capitalists for investments and for potential investments in the business. And one of the individuals I met was Jake Cohen. And Jake was running Detroit Venture Partners, Dan Gilbert's family office / venture group in Detroit. And Jake and I really hit it off, and we kind of started developing this relationship. And Jake, they never invested, but Jake and I became really good friends, close friends. And so when I was going through Rep Pro and building it out and going through the transition of selling the business and then working there, Jake and I just always stayed in touch, and he'd give me kind of advice and feedback on the transaction that I was doing. And so when it came time to start the business, Signal Advisors, I had always, because I was in Rep Pro, one of our customers were insurance distributors. We would sell to insurance companies, we'd sell to insurance distributors, and then we'd also sell to independent financial advisors. So I was really getting educated on how this IMO space, this independent marketing organization space, worked. And I was talking to Jake about it, and I thought there was a real opportunity to build tech because I just didn't think they valued tech the way they should. But I also thought there were good margins in the space where we could actually create a better way of doing things. I think it enabled us to create a better way of doing things because you had healthy margins. And so it was kind of over that 6-year process that Jake and I said, man, there's something to do in this IMO space. And then timing worked out right where I said, hey, Jake, I'm thinking about leaving RetireUp. I said, would Detroit Venture Partners be interested in investing in Signal Advisors? It wasn't called Signal Advisors, didn't have a name, in this tech-enabled insurance distributor concept. And he's like, it is interesting. I'm definitely interested in knowing more and trying to figure this whole thing out. And then like a couple of weeks went by, we talked a couple more times. Then he's like, I've got a crazy idea. I've always wanted to get back into being an entrepreneur. What if I joined the team and we started this business together? And I said, man, I knew Jake was a really smart guy, and I always enjoyed our conversations. I was like, that would be awesome. Because also now you've got basically my industry experience, but Jake has a really great experience in kind of building high growth businesses. And I think when you go through this building a high growth business, there's a lot of counterintuitive things that you learn and you need to implement. And so Jake really brings that to the table. And then Jake said to me, Pat, if we're going to build a tech-enabled IMO, neither Jake and I are both not engineers. He's like, we're going to need a CTO, a chief technology officer. He's like, I already know the guy. He's my top pick. I don't even know if we can get him, but let's go talk to him. So Jake introduced me to Kevin. and Jake and Kevin met, and we all met together, and we said, this is what we're doing. And he was like, man, this sounds like a really cool opportunity. I'd love to join the founding team. So that was kind of how it all came together. It was kind of bits and pieces over a long time.
I love this story because there's so many founders, so many VCs that started off as founders, and they know the process and they know how hard it is. They know how to add value. So they go from being in the trenches to being a VC with that bird's eye view. And I think it's really helpful, but you don't see a lot of VCs getting back in. And I think it really shows, you guys always talk about, everyone in Detroit talks about their grit and their, willingness to roll up their sleeves and work. And I think that's a real, going from VC to a founder is basically going from taking the elevator to taking the stairs, right? That's like, I'm going to take the harder road. And I love it.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting too. I mean, I would think that in a lot of ways, venture capital is just more distributed risk, right? Like you've got capital and you're deploying it across many portfolio companies. So yes, being an entrepreneur is inherently more risky. And I agree. It's very interesting.
So I recently watched The Last Dance, a documentary about the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan. And I love this part, how every time, Michael Jordan he'd almost like look out for opportunities to feel slighted or to feel disrespected. So he could use that as fire to fuel his drive. And,
right.
All these great stories, his GM said that Dan Marley was this great defensive player. So he's like, oh yeah. And he puts 40 points on Dan Marley. You told me a very similar story about from early in your career. Why don't you share that with our audience?
Yeah, sure. No, I think whenever you're starting something or going a different direction than people want you to go, I think sometimes that creates some friction. And so, early in my career, I was a financial advisor, I mentioned, and I was contemplating a move. I was contemplating starting this business, RepPro, which we've talked about a little bit. And so I had my exit interview. I was kind of prepping for this thing. I was sweating it a little bit because I was this young guy, and I was meeting with one of the senior partners. And I said, hey, this is just not what I want to do. I like being in and around the profession, but it's just not how I see approaching the problems that I see in the industry. And, he kind of looked at me and said, well, Pat, I got to say, and he was a little angry. This is the most juvenile thing I've ever heard. Like, you've got a great path to making a ton of money here. You're going to do really well. Just do really well. Like, just go down the path, man. Like, don't walk away from it. And, I think for me, I always think about that where I just say to myself, there's so many different things at different points in time that you need for motivation. Whether, like for me, I've got an 8-month-old daughter. She's always motivation to me to do better and do better things for her. I've got an awesome wife, Alyssa, who I always use as motivation for myself in terms of like really wanting to perpetuate a better life for our family overall. But then also, I think it's a really helpful tool to understand all of these people in your past who have doubted you. And you always kind of like keep that in your back pocket, not from an anger perspective, not like, it's not uncontrollable, but just kind of like this slow burning flame that says like, I can be something bigger. I can build something better. I can see a better path forward. And so that's how I think about it. And I use it all the time. I think about, there's lots of situations where I just kind of like mentally store it so I can go back to it for further fuel.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, at the end of the day, either the world, whoever sees you, everyone, is going to see you however they see you. And you take the lowest common denominator of that. Either they're going to convince you that you're on that level, or you're going to convince them that you're on the level that you're on. And it's almost like a test of wills. If you accept somebody else's negative view of you, then you've lost. And I guess a little hard to articulate what I'm trying to say, but, I've dealt with a lot of that as well,
right.
Dealing with doubters and like, no, I am going to will my view of myself and my capability upon them. And they have no idea this whole inner fight that,
Totally.
that I'm going through, but you have to, because if you don't believe in yourself inside and out and all the way through, and you don't, express that, and that doesn't come out, then you can't succeed.
Yeah. And, it's not about even getting angry in the moment, because it's like, they're not going to convince you and you're not going to convince them. Like, we both have differing opinions. I'm going to go my different way, and I'm quietly going to work towards proving that person wrong every step of the way. And I also, not to even like be confused here with the fact that I'm doing this to like prove somebody wrong. I'm doing this for myself and my family. But at the same time, there's different ways you can use tools to fuel the fire. And there's just one more tool in your tool belt. When it's 2:00 in the morning and you got to send that email and you'd rather go to bed, you send the email.
So you are right now with Signal Advisors. You're at that right point of integration between technology and financial services. And everyone's been talking about this now for probably like 3 years. It's really been on the forefront of the industry's mind. And everyone's talking about fintech and all these integration. Where do you think we are right now from where we were, from the tools and technology that advisors used 5 years ago to where, it's ultimately going to reach its point of maturity, or, where the innovation will start to slow down? Where in that spectrum do you think we are today?
I think we're probably somewhere in the middle. I think the biggest problem with technology in the space today is that there's just so many vendors. It's hard to even know which ones to choose, how to make them work efficiently together. And I think, too, the reality is that you're seeing consolidation in the custodian space, which is generally kind of driving like, okay, how am I going to use these tech partners and how are they going to work together? So I just think you're going to have these custodians choose some of the industry leaders. Those industry leaders are going to be super integrated into the custodians. And it's not really going to make sense to use some sort of like small third party that just has like one feature that they do really well. I think that's a big problem in fintech, is like you kind of start this company around this feature and then no one has anywhere to go from there. Like you really need a platform. And basically what people are doing is just integrating into the custodians. But I think like, as an example, who made the transition really well is Riskalyze. I think they did a great transition. They basically were this risk assessment tool, but it's really become so much more than that. It's really become a platform. And I think like that's kind of like that chasm you got to jump in the fintech space with, like start with a feature and become a platform. Most people don't make that transition smoothly. And I think you're going to see less tools in the future, not more, because I just think there's going to be a lot of acquisitions. And I think you need consolidation in order to have a streamlined approach. Everyone's talking about streamlining, but it's not feasible to streamline 80 different tools. I need a simpler set of tools that do more things for me that work with my whole tech stack. And I think it's a little too fragmented right now.
When you look at like Apple right now is with, they're getting sued by Epic Games. They kicked Epic Games off their platform. We'll see if the lawsuit goes anywhere, but Apple has 100% control over the App Store, over anything, right?
Right.
Do you think that a lot of fintech companies are facing that same risk right now because of the dominance of two custodians?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I really like TD's approach. And obviously TD's was purchased, but I really like their open architecture platform. I just think that's a better way to approach all these different, this amazing amount of choice and when it comes to technology and financial services. But I do think that, like, look at Apple versus Microsoft. I do think the better end user experience is probably something that's a more enclosed environment from a tech perspective, because you have all these independent financial advisors out there. They don't have the resources to hire software engineers to make these things really work together. They generally need something a little bit more out of the box. That's why Salesforce is generally not a great CRM for a small independent financial advisor. They just don't have the Salesforce engineers on staff in order to configure it the right way to really make it work. It's amazing. It's got all the bells and whistles, but it's hard if you don't have the right people. So I think that same problem, it might happen with TD. If Fidelity can kind of like become a little bit more tech focused, I think that they've got an opportunity to create a really strong, streamlined process when it comes from like end-to-end financial services.
So when you took those 6 years and you were looking at different business plans and batting around different ideas and thinking about where to come into the market, ultimately settling on Signal Advisors and where you are now, how did all that play in? Was it just simply the opportunity because it was so inefficient the way people were managing their IMOs and integrating? Was it just the opportunity, or is there kind of a bigger plan to turn Signal into a platform?
Yeah, I think one is that it was a really large opportunity. It's kind of funny because it's like a $72 billion opportunity. There's $72 billion in fixed, it's actually fixed index annuities, to be very specific right now. We're just kind of like going deep in one specific area. But $72 billion is a lot of money. But, in financial services, you talk in the trillions a lot of times. So it can seem very niche and small. And so in some ways it is. But what we believe is, one, is that, the annuity space is growing, and we like that about it. We think the margins are really good, but we also know that there's not really any good software in this insurance producer space. And so kind of like bridging that gap between the wealth management space and the insurance world is a problem that we haven't seen anybody tackle good or well. At Signal Advisors, we're creating it's not like we're improving on the current process. We're literally creating, the first case design tool, which is a way to request annuity illustrations, or we're building a commission management platform from scratch, which doesn't exist, like real-time commission reporting. And one of the other things we do is we pay people same day. So like there were so many ways that we could just take big jumps in improvement in this space that we knew we could win. So it's kind of like our confidence that we knew we could win. We liked the size of the market was good, but the interesting thing was it wasn't like gargantuan to the point where everyone it was such a red ocean. So we felt the ocean was blue enough and we could really differentiate ourselves, and we tackled it. And it's also a great beachhead. I mean, we can go in a million different directions.
So you're based in Detroit, and you've had an inside view of Detroit's comeback. What were some of the pivotal moments that you saw Detroit starting to turn around over the last few years?
Well, it's interesting as an employer in Detroit, I think, because what we've been able to do is through what Dan Gilbert's done downtown and so many entrepreneurs and so many business builders and job opportunity creators, the talent pool is so much richer. I think about building RepPro 6 years ago and, starting the financial practice that I talked about, like all of that was in this Detroit ecosystem. And actually like 6 years ago was a lifetime in Detroit years in terms of where the city was and to where it is now. And so I just look at that and I think about the talent pool and the people we were able to talk to and who were interested in coming to Detroit. There's like people actually interested in it from major metropolitan areas, Chicago, San Francisco, New York, all interested in coming to Detroit. So that wasn't really the case 6 years ago. But then on top of it, there's amazing talent here. All the companies that are really investing in the city, there's a great talent pool is really what I'm trying to say. And I've noticed that change in a big way. I'll say lunch is a little different. I remember, Jake Cohen, my co-founder, tells a story when he started in 2008 in Detroit and how there were no down Woodward, that main drag. There were no storefronts. Now it's obviously we're in COVID, so it's a little different, but I mean, there's some, there's Nike, there's a great store called Moose Jaw there. There's like mountain gear and outdoor sporting. There's Under Armour. There's so many cool things down there. And it's a great place. Like I live in the suburbs, but my wife and I drive 25 minutes to Detroit for dinner. 6 years ago, never would have done that. So it's multifaceted in terms of how many things have changed. It's crazy.
They've really done an amazing job at bringing in food carts and in the summer they set up a beach area with sand and all that, and the scooters and just making it feel like a vibrant downtown. And just the difference, I've been here for a shorter amount of time, but the difference I've seen over that time is really huge. And it is just a very vibrant downtown. And I've seen from my hiring in Detroit, the talent pool is unbelievable. I mean, forget about just the local universities and, University of Michigan and Wayne State and Michigan State and so many different great universities. But there are, like you said, there are a lot of people that grew up somewhere in the area that want to get back. And there are people now that are attracted to the fact that it is very affordable. There's a burgeoning scene. There's a great culinary scene. There's a great art scene. There's, the music is great. It's really a fun place. And, you look at how corporate a lot of the bigger cities have gotten and how prohibitive they are. If you're a young restaurateur and you want to open up a restaurant in Chicago or San Francisco, you need major corporate backing.
Right.
But in Detroit, you could buy an old house for, a couple $1,000s, renovate it, put in some sweat equity, and all of a sudden you're up and running. And I think a lot of people are very attracted to that.
No, I mean, the cuisine, you hit the nail on the head. The cuisine in Detroit is outstanding. And it's really fun checking out all the new places that are springing. I mean, I feel like every week there's a new restaurant to try. So yeah, I agree. It's a lot of fun to work down there. We actually have an awesome office that overlooks Comerica Park. And before COVID hit, we were actually we work with independent financial advisors like I talked about at Signal Advisors. We'd bring financial advisors in town and we'd take them to a sports game. And we actually have, I think, I need to be fact checked on this, but I think that it's the closest in the United States, it's the four major sports teams are the closest in proximity to each other. So you got, the Red Wings, Lions, Tigers, and Pistons all within less than a mile.
So I know you're a big reader. Are there any books that for you have been particularly, that have really, shaped your philosophy or the entrepreneurial drive?
Actually, we were talking about Ryan Holiday. I think I've read every single book that he's written. Well, I like Stoic philosophy a lot. I think that kind of is a fundamental tenet to the way that I try to approach life. It's not easy being a Stoic, but I try to take a lot of those principles and catch myself when I get out of sorts. But also, one of the things for me is I guess I still am dyslexic. And so as a kid, I hated reading because it was so hard. And so for me, one of the things is just making sure that reading is like really like joyful. Like I love it. So what I mean around that, or like how I approach that, is I just try to read a broad spectrum of stuff. So it's not, fiction or nonfiction. It's just really all of the above. As long as I'm enjoying what I'm reading, then I'll go to the next book, and I'll go to the next thing. And so that's the biggest thing for me. Like I really like Neil Gaiman. He's got this book called The Graveyard Book. It's almost like, it's not for a younger audience, but it's not like written for, it's not so serious. Anyways, I think he's a fantastic author. I think the best startup book I've read is by Peter Thiel. It's called 0 to 1. I just like it because that's the book that really kind of like, it talks a lot about, there's so many great things about it, but it really hit home to me how to structure a business in a way that provides an unfair advantage so that you will win. We were talking about this earlier. Getting into business is a 7-10 year commitment. And so I don't want to go into a business that has really low margins with a lot of competition. Peter Thiel has a great saying that's competition's for losers. Yeah, it's because if there's lots of competition,
competition's for losers and ETF issuers.
It's just that there's lots of competition. That means low margins, meaning and it's really hard to differentiate. And you get yourself in feature wars, and it's just really hard to build value when there's so many players doing the same thing as you. So, anyways, there's so many I think good lessons from that book, but I really enjoyed that one specifically.
I love that as well. I love that book. And, it's just amazing to me how he described that the government is creating monopolies on one hand, right, by trademarks, copyrights and all that. And on the other hand, they're busting up monopolies, or theoretically they should be. They haven't been lately, but.
No, it's like, he says something along the lines of people underestimate how many monopolies are because the companies that are monopolies are trying to convince everyone they aren't.
That's it, yep.
And then the companies who are not monopolies are trying to convince everyone that they are, that they're so unique and they do so many things different. And so like, it's actually hidden in plain sight, and you want to be a monopoly because monopolies mean monopolistic profits. And that's the whole competition are for losers thing,
Yeah, and that's how you get pricing power, and that's how you get the moat and everything else. I thought it was a really fantastic book, a quick, easy read, and really just the concepts were like, really lasting and insightful. So it's funny that you mentioned stoicism and Ryan Holiday. So I ask every guest, my closing question is, tell me about an obstacle that you've had either in your personal life or your career that you've either persisted through or found a way to work around. And the reason why I ask that question is from the book, The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. And it's a stoic idea that we all face obstacles, but you turn that obstacle into your path. And it's a collection of short essays about very successful people, famous people that have had different obstacles that they've overcome. I found the book to be very inspirational. I like to ask it because I have a lot of people on the podcast who by and large are very successful. And I like to show the audience that every single person, if they're successful, nobody ever had it easy. Nobody ever had it handed to them. Everyone's got all different kinds of obstacles, be it personal, be it professional, be it, whatever it is. And I think it's very instructive. So, that actually comes from Ryan Holiday. And now I ask that to you. Have you had an obstacle in your life that you've worked around?
Yeah, I mean, I've got one that I'll talk about, and hopefully I can think of another one. But so one is, I've got a bunch, but I think like everybody. But one that just came to mind because I mentioned it earlier was having dyslexia growing up, and that it was a real learning disability, and it was really challenging, and I didn't like school. And I think over time, like I really turned it on, kind of like junior year of college, in terms of like working all the time, loving learning, like, because I found a way to do it that suited me. And I also think that what happened was because everything was hard as a kid in terms of like going to school and like learning new subjects, I always looked at things a little bit like, how do I make this easier? Like, what's the way that I go around this thing? Because I can't spell this word. Is there another word I could use in my vocabulary that I do know how to spell? Something along those lines. Or maybe, because I'm dyslexic, I'd change words around, was and saw and stuff like that. So I would try to not use words that I would do that to a lot. So it was like kind of just always thinking a little bit outside the box in order to not have the dyslexia show as much in my work. And I think that's helped me a lot just in general, think through problems. Like, okay, this is hard for me specifically as a person. how do I make it easier for myself? What do I do in order to kind of like make my life easier, make this problem easier? Who do I hire on my team? Like, and also it helps me think about my strengths and weaknesses a lot more. Like I've got very acute weaknesses and I have very acute strengths. And I think that's helpful because now I know, okay, these are the people I absolutely have to hire because if I do this thing, I'm just going to fail. But and I'll just go heads down on these other things that I'm really good at. So I that was actually kind of a blessing and a curse for sure. That was the biggest one that comes to mind. There was a couple big ones. I mean, I played college lacrosse and I had a really big decision to make is whether or not I was going to continue to play college lacrosse or if I was going to focus. I kind of like came to this place where I was like, okay, I'm not going to play professional college lacrosse. What should I go do? How should I post college? How should I spend my time? And so kind of like sophomore year, I decided to leave the school I was at and go and transfer over to Michigan State. And that was a big inflection point for me. That's when I started Rep Pro, actually, like the first days of starting Rep Pro at my internship at Northwestern Mutual. I met my wife there. So, I mean, you just kind of like go back in time and think about these like massive inflection point moments. And that was, at the time, it was a really big decision. And it totally put my life on a different course.
You said a couple things there that I want to kind of back up into. One was you mentioned in passing hiring for your weaknesses. So you know your weaknesses and hiring people that compensate for that. So often you see people that try to hire clones of themselves, or they hire, that you see the personality of a firm like kind of follows the founder or the CEO, and a lot of people have the same strengths. And I think it's so critical to hire to your weakness people that are going to complement you. Also, your story, very, very much reminded me, the great writer Morgan Housel was on this podcast, and he talked about how when he was young, he had a stutter, and he had to think, like as he talked, he would think forward ahead of as he's talking about, what words he would use that he wouldn't have difficulty with. And now he's, I think he's the best financial writer in the whole country. And, you have to wonder, did he train himself from a young age to think through how to use words and what to say and get really good at that because of that weakness? You turn that weakness into a strength.
Yeah, no, I think it's out of necessity, and there were so many struggles. I mean, Rep Pro was a really tough thing, they raising capital for the first time as a young business owner. I mean, that's super challenging. Almost went out of business a couple times, so I think all of those things helped me understand being in the trenches and not have things go well make you battle tested. And so I love those things. I wear those as badges of honor. And I think that people should talk about them more because this whole entire overnight success thing is just complete bullshit. I talked about Signal Advisors with a culmination of 6 years. It was probably more, but I mean, at least when we started talking about it, and kind of piecing together the founding team. So yeah, I think that these big problems that people have in their lives actually lead to their successes. So I think it's a great question, and there's almost more than I can even think about.
No, but those are great, and I want to thank you for joining the show. I want to congratulate you on the launch. Congratulations on becoming a father, and congratulations on your recent move to a new house. So you've been quite busy. Where can financial advisors learn more about working with Signal?
Yeah, sure. So signaladvisors.com is the obvious place. We're also on all the social channels. So Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn are all great places. And, you can reach me actually at patrick@signaladvisors.com is my email address, and feel free to shoot me an email.
All right. Well, thank you again. Thank you to our audience for your time and attention. We'll be back next week.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the Phil Bach Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment to drop a review. This show was published for entertainment purposes only and is not investment advice. Please contact a licensed professional before making any investments. Some of the securities discussed on the show may be owned by its participants. Opinions expressed on the show may not reflect those of their employers. Stay hungry and stay foolish.